I have Lea Pica with me, who is the person that talks about data. And if you, and I'm sure that a lot of you, since you are business professionals, a lot of you have been in the position where might be falling asleep during your session, or people might be extremely bored or tired when they're looking at your data. Well, Lea is the person who is changing that. Hi, Lea. How are you?
Hi, I'm great. Thank you for having me.
It's absolutely pleasure to have you. This is the last session of the day, and I'm sure it's going to be a strong one. But I'm not going to spill out anything because I've seen the session. I know what you're going to talk about, but you are definitely in for a treat, everyone who is here with us. Again, as we've done with the previous sessions, make sure you put your questions in the Q&A section. We are following up in the Q&A sections all of the questions that are getting there. Of course, discussions and insights are, of course, allowed in the chat room, but to make sure we don't miss your question, put it in the Q&A. So, Lea, now the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you so much for that introduction. I'm so thrilled and honored to be included in such an amazing lineup with this awesome event. Wherever you are joining in from today, I am so, honored that you decided to give this time to my session. And just as a reminder, in order to remain really present with this learning experience today, it would just be great to make sure that phones and computers are left on do not disturb or airplane mode, just so we can make sure that no one's calling to ask if we want broccoli for lunch or any sort of things that maybe people have called me about in the middle of sessions. So I want to welcome you to my session called the Pica Protocol, a prescription for healthy, actionable data storytelling. And you're here because you guys are probably into stories a bit, and you're probably also into data a bit too, hopefully, and this would be the right session for you. So I want to kick this off with a question. I'm actually going to turn it around to you guys right now. And I want to ask you to think about, and you're welcome to drop this in the chat, but I want you to think about this question. What makes a great story? And I'm talking about the greats, the stories that enlivened us, that thrilled us, that were memorable, that transformed us, that stuck with us. Think of The Wizard of Oz, Star Wars, Breaking Bad, whatever story sticks out for you. And try to think of these 2 to 3 word phrases. So I'll give you an example, like intriguing, relatable characters. So just try to think of that and maybe drop some of those in the chat if you can, just to get those thought bubbles started. And I want you to think about that just for a second. Okay, so there are a number of common elements that are present in all of the best told stories that we can remember. Things, like I said, intriguing, relatable characters, compelling plot, an impossible challenge, an exciting climax and surprising twists and turns, and a satisfying conclusion or resolution, right? These feel like the common elements that are present in great stories. Now I want you to think about what this brings up for you. Ta-da! Well, does it drop any of the things that I just talked about? Any of those elements? For me, it doesn't. So I would not call this a story. I'm not sure what it is, but it's not a story by the definition that I have. What about this? I mean, this looks like a slide or a view that we might present in any number of business meetings and whatnot, but it's not a story, right? There's a story in here somewhere, but unfortunately, the way that we've become accustomed to presenting our data like this, the story often gets lost. And that is what the essence of data storytelling is. It's not just pretty graphs. It's not just interesting slides. It's actual story. To really understand this issue, we have to think about what happens when one of our stakeholders, if you present in a business context that way, and you're required or you're responsible for providing insights to that team, one of your stakeholders might call you up and ask, hey, can you present some performance results or campaign results or test results or something delightfully vague, which is what I commonly experienced as an analyst. When they ask you for that and you think you bring that in and you provide that, there's this confusion as to why we look around that room or the virtual conference room now and we see everyone maybe not paying full attention to what we're talking about. Glazed eyeballs, little drool, the what I call the browser tab hop. They're clearly multitasking. And it's not pretty. And you wonder if all that hard work that you did analyzing and crunching data and putting a slide deck together actually had the impact that you were really hoping for. And I know that I was so tired of this view happening over and over to me, wondering, where was I going wrong? So 10 years ago, I kind of accidentally tripped down a rabbit hole of this whole philosophical journey to find answers to this very deep metaphysical question. Ready, guys? This is really deep. Why do bad things happen to good data? I mean, come on. The data is sound. I checked it 3 times. It's statistically significant. What is going on? And I found all kinds of answers to this question, many of which you might already be familiar with because you're at this conference. So you're already familiar with the idea of presenting with certain principles. But when it comes to data, there's something so often missing. And it has to do with this term, data storytelling. The way I think of data storytelling is kind of like that shiny wrapped present under the Christmas tree. It's all we can think about because it's so shiny and wonderful and we have no idea what's inside, but we're completely obsessed with it. Is it the latest chart, fanciest chart? Is it a new data viz platform with lots of features and things that I don't actually really need or might not use? And that is kind of the obsession that is happening where there isn't a lot of clarity around what that actually entails. And we're not given this information when we go into the corporate workforce. And, in addition to crunching our numbers all day and calculating fields and all that fun stuff, they're also asking us to go into a room with these important looking people called stakeholders. And we have to convince them that what we're doing matters and that they should do something about it. But because we don't have those storytelling mechanics under our belt, we end up walking in there with a giant vomiting of all these different numbers that are all disjointed and no particular cohesive narrative running through because that's what they wanted, right? They asked for results, but that's not actually what they're asking for. Stakeholders don't always have the language to describe what it is they really need because they never learned that in stakeholder school. Right. So I'm going to translate what a lot of stakeholders are actually thinking when you go in there and present. They're saying, hey, I've got a lot on my plate. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to show me how to move my business forward in a way that I understand quickly and easily. And here's the key, in a way that makes me want to act. And I'm going to leave the how behind that to you. They don't care about how long your analysis took, how complex it was, how hard. They don't have time to care about these things. They just want to know what it means for them. And that's why what you're going to learn today is that numbers create data, but it's stories that will create your insights. A well-told data story does 4 important things really well. It answers the burning questions that they have about how the data will inform their business. It informs the business decisions that they're looking to make so they're not flying blind. It inspires new ideas, new questions. Maybe there's something that you haven't thought of that will be created by that exploration. And finally, it galvanizes your audience into action. Now, the struggle that I had when I was going through this philosophical journey of learning all of this on my own was that there wasn't a concrete approach that I could use every time to accomplish what I wanted with my data stories. Everything was very theoretical and abstract and all this stuff. So I did what my type A personality loves to do, and I made one up. And I call it the Pica protocol, which I described as this prescription, a practical, repeatable approach that you can use every single time. Now, I do have a bit of a caveat. If you collect, analyze, or present data, you're in luck. The session is for you, obviously. And I will also say, if you receive, consume, or make decisions with the data, this session is also for you because you're going to understand exactly what the task is at hand for the people presenting to you. You're going to become a more educated consumer, which makes the whole process go so much easier. So I am hoping we are ready to dive in. I needed to do a little bit of stage setting to get you warmed up and receptive to what I have, because you're going to see some habits that we're very accustomed to, and I want to help break those patterns. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to start with the first letter in our protocol, which is P for purpose. So when I talk about a purpose, every data story inside your data presentation should have a purpose. And the purpose is not necessarily because someone asked for it. It is important to give people what they ask for, but you want to be aware that that is why you're using something. And when we think about all of the reasons that all of us gather around that conference table, right, there are a lot of different needs and wants and concerns and fears gathering. You know, this lady might be like, well, how can we improve our campaign email performance? It's not doing so great. And she might be saying, are we hitting our regional sales quota this quarter? I don't know if we're going to make it. And this guy's like, I want to know how much money we're leaving on the table. We're bleeding cash somewhere. And this guy on the end here is like, wait, what am I doing here? What's this about? And I feel like we've all been that guy, but we've probably all had that guy in our meetings, and understanding the purposes of your data stories is essential for making sure that thought bubble doesn't pop up during your meeting. And that's why for me, I've come to believe that every truly great data story begins with a clear question. Okay, we get to be detectives and put on our detective hat and really start to ask a series of questions that get us to the purpose. So here's where you want to get a little philosophical again with your data. You want to sit down and you want to be like, dude, why do you exist? Okay, why? What need are you meeting? Are you meeting a need for financial security and safety and stability? Are you meeting a need for growth and more volatility? What problem are you solving? Is there a major issue somewhere that is causing a major problem with our performance, our satisfaction? What decision are you informing? Is there a decision? Hopefully every meeting is oriented around a decision or a series of decisions. And what is that? How can your data inform that? And then finally, and we don't often think about this, but how are you making my stakeholders' lives better? Are you making their life better by helping them achieve a personal goal that they have, overcoming a major obstacle in completing a major project, making the customers happier, which makes the whole organization happier as well? How are you making their lives better? That has been an amazing North Star for me developing the purpose of my visuals. Now, once you start to have answers to these questions, it helps you do something that is a vital part of this first step of the process, which is to choose the most appropriate data visualization or chart type for the data that you are plotting out. Now, there's a whole art and science behind selecting appropriate charts, and it's getting harder to do because there is a proliferation of new chart types and new visualization types all the time. And it's our job that as the choices grow, that we become more and more discerning. And you'd be amazed, but when it comes to executive presentations, the choices you should stick with are pretty limited because they don't have any knowledge of how to interpret a lot of the fancy charts that are out there. So one of the ways that you can start to do this is to look for keywords in the questions that people are asking and the answers that you're getting. So let's say you might be actually having a conversation with your stakeholder, which I highly recommend, and you're trying to probe a bit more deeply using some of these questions. And you ask, like, okay, what are you looking for? What do you need right now? So your stakeholder might respond, well, we want to know why our usability satisfaction score is decreasing on our website. We're just looking in our voice of customer and it's going down. People are not liking something that's happening. So you probe a little more deeply and you'll say, well, maybe there's a clue in what they're coming to do. What are the reasons for visiting that were most problematic for our customers? Maybe that can provide some insight. See, you've got your detective hat on. Now, I highlighted a couple of phrases in blue because these are your keywords. Reasons for visiting is a list of categories that can be compared to itself in a way, right? And then most problematic indicates some kind of measure that you can use to compare those categories to it. So most problematic might be the lowest score, lowest satisfaction score. So you're crunching all of this information and you're like, okay, what we need is a comparison of the reasons for visiting our website, plus comparing successful versus unsuccessful visits. Why did people visit, and were they successful or not? So this leads me to choosing a chart type. It's pretty simple and universal. A horizontal 100% stacked bar chart. A horizontal bar chart is the best choice for ranking categories compared using some kind of number, metric, measure, whatever you call it. And a 100% stacked bar is going to allow us to divide the bar into successful versus unsuccessful. Now, I don't want you to get too caught up about this example. I want you to remember that this is about learning a specific framework for going through and inquiring into your data. I tried to pick something fairly simple, but the idea is it can apply to literally any data that you might be working with. So here's what that might look like. Here is the percent of unsuccessful visits according to the reason that they visited. What I've done here is I've sorted the bars by most unsuccessful to least unsuccessful, because that takes work off of my audience's brain of figuring out which one was the most problematic. This literally answers that question. Okay, so here, this red bar indicates the percent of unsuccessful visits, and it's comparing this against the list of tasks that people came here to do. Hopefully that makes perfect sense. Now, what's interesting here is that even in this first chart selection, we've already started to understand what's happening in this data. If you look at these top two bars, these were both 100% unsuccessful. That can indicate a major issue here, and they both had to do with account information. Notice. So our initial thought around this, the initial data point is telling us, okay, we should focus on account information. That is clearly what this is telling us up front. So we have a first step in our story. Now I want to tell you something that's very important to remember. Your visualization tool does not know what your best chart choice is. This is a practice and an art of discernment that you are going to make as a data communicator every single day. Yes, there are algorithms and tools like Tableau and other things that will help you narrow it down to 5 choices, but at the end of the day, you have to make that choice on your own. But it's all about getting empowered with the information about which one to choose and practicing and seeing how that works. Make sense? Okay, so now we have our purpose established for our first part of the data story. We move on to the next letter in the protocol, which is I, for insight. Oh, I love this word. It's kind of a lot like the word data storytelling. What exactly does it mean? But gosh, we talk about it all the time. So I decided to break this down and figure out, well, what does this mean? What does insight mean? It means the capacity to gain an accurate and deep intuitive understanding of a person or thing. That is the criteria that every single data story should pass that you present to your executives. If it doesn't have the capacity to help them gain accurate, deep, intuitive understandings, then you haven't hit the mark with how you've laid out your data story. So this is the criteria that I use. I run past everything that I do. Now, one of the most valuable things that you can do in elevating insight is to create story mechanics in your data story. And I've actually translated what's known as a narrative arc, which you might be familiar with, into how that can apply to data specifically. So here's what that journey looks like. First, we ask, well, what happened? Set that stage. This is like the exposition stage. And what surprised us about it? That offers a little bit of tension and that twist that people are seeking when they want to hear a story. Why do we think that it happened? This is a little bit more subjective. So the what happened is the objective observation, but the why do we think it happened is the more subjective interpretation that we bring to the table with our unique expertise, right? So we have to use that wisely. Okay, how bad can this situation get? How can it get worse? This is kind of like building up to a climax in a story. We have to know that this is a dire situation. What are the stakes if we don't take action? This is a big one in the journey because of a psychological dynamic called loss aversion. Humans, it's been proven that humans would rather do something to avoid losing something they have rather than gaining something that they don't have. So when we frame the stakes of our story as something they could potentially lose, that is one of the most powerful motivators to get stakeholders who are so busy and overwhelmed to take action on the thing that you're recommending, okay? And that lays the groundwork for you to come in and provide your recommendation. Okay, what should we do about it, right? So we see that this is a dire situation. What should we do? And who should do it and by when? So when I have laid my data story in this particular structure, I answer those questions, I inspire new ideas, I inform those decisions, and I galvanize into action, right? Those four things. Now, how do you lay this out visually? So I want to show you one of my most favorite tools that I've ever heard of. It's called the Anatomy of a Healthy Data Story slide. I've adapted this from a wonderful book called Good Charts by my friend Scott Baronato over at Harvard Business Review. And this is what the perfect data slide might look like. You have your title up here. It's in about 12%. It's not scientific. Don't go measuring your slide. It's more of a guideline. So you have your title up here. It's about 12%. You have a subtitle, 8%. Now you have this big, beautiful visualization field. It's 3/4 of your field. That's where your chart will go. That's where callouts might go or annotations, things like that. And then finally, you always want to source your data at the bottom of your slide to create trust with your stakeholder. Now, I want you to focus on this little area up here, and you might already be familiar with this technique, but if not, no worries, you're about to hear it. Many people don't realize, and no one told us, that that is the most valuable real estate on your slide, because the human eye immediately jumps to, especially in Western cultures, will jump to that upper left corner and read the slide to themselves in a Z pattern, depending on how visual the slide is. So what we often end up doing with that valuable real estate is we put a statement of what the chart on the slide is. Percent of unsuccessful visits per reason of a visit. Instant asleepness for everybody, okay? That is not the most effective use of that space. So rather than a statement about what the chart is, take that, put it in a smaller subtitle, and then put an observation or an insight in your title space, such as account information tasks Both resulted in no successful visits. Boom! That is a story, okay? This is not a story. This is. It's the same data visual, but it's your story that's coming out in the most important area. And this, as I understand it, is what's known as a McKinsey title. And a McKinsey title will help guarantee that no matter how people visually interpret your charts and graphs, the story that you're trying to convey is crystal clear, especially if someone takes a screenshot or grabs it and sends it to someone. Your narrative path is set there, even if you're not there to narrate, okay? This is a standard tool being used by the most prominent, prestigious journalism, everything. So you'll see it everywhere, but it's an incredibly powerful tool for business presentations. Okay, I hope you're feeling like there's new pathways being laid and you're excited. So we're halfway there. So now we have C for context. Context is a fun part because this is where we really get to dive in and do our detective work. This is where the analyzing is fun, you know, if we're data people. And what this step is about asking, do I have all the information at my disposal to tell a complete picture? In other words, am I showing all of the information needed for my stakeholders to make a sound and informed decision? So when we went through that first purpose step, you'll notice I kind of took what the first insight was at face value and I left it there. And I'm encouraging you to not do that. Never close the book on the first pass of the data that you're analyzing because you never know there could be a bigger story hiding underneath. Some of the questions that might be useful for you to ask as you're going through this process. Things like, is this issue happening by region? What if we look at mobile platform? Will that shed some light? What tests we're running at this time? What other data sources can I bring in that will expand the view of this analysis, like our surveys, market research, focus group, maybe more qualitative data, right? So you start asking the deeper questions here. Now, there are a number of really useful context tools that you can use to visually provide insight for people while you're presenting. Things like performance targets and benchmarks are incredibly valuable visual tools to provide context. Okay, this is what happened, but what happened in context of where we were supposed to be? This is a very powerful thing, and it really keeps people motivated to continue to optimize. What about prior time period comparison? The obvious one might be, well, we redesigned our website, so we want to look before and after. But what if we have a seasonal event that happened? What if looking at it same time last year? That might be incredibly important information. Segmentation is valuable. So we can start with an aggregate number, kind of like the way that we did. But the real devil is in those details. What kind of segments, like geographic region, demographics, by salesperson, whatever way you can slice and dice could provide invaluable information. And then finally, the one that we're going to continue our example story with is additional measures. So rather than looking at slices and dices from the categories, what if there are more metrics or measures that could actually provide information too? So if I'm an analyst and I'm looking at that first insight, I'm like, I don't want to get stuck there. What else could be going on? We're looking at the percentage breakdown of unsuccessful, but we're not actually looking at visit volume, right? Because people are going to be coming for one particular reason, one or two reasons, more than other reasons, right? So we don't want to optimize for the reason that 2 people came when there might be another reason that 500 people came, right? This is what this is about. So we can add a second measure to our visual view using something called a side-by-side bar chart, also known as a table lens, which is a view coined by data viz guru Stephen Few. Highly recommend reading everything he's ever written. So here we have our original view, and if anyone's getting caught up with the not prettiness of this, don't worry, that's actually intentional. But here we have our initial view of percent of unsuccessful visits. Now we bring in the volume of how many people actually visited depending on that reason. And I've lined those bars up to match the category all the way on the left. It's kind of like a table with two different columns of numbers, right? But it's more visual. So now we're seeing a different story pop out here. We're seeing that even though we were most unsuccessful in account information, the total visits is actually fairly low, okay? That is really fascinating here. But something else is also popping out that could be a more interesting story. Product information specs has a high volume of visits. It's tied for second place, but it has the third highest unsuccessful visit rate. So we might get more traction if we optimize that area rather than the first area that came out, which is why that twist is so important. Now, what I'm not suggesting is to discard your original story. I suggest keeping your original story, but you're going to pivot to that twist to create that narrative arc that we love so much. Okay, so our real ending story is that product specs is third least successful, but it's tied for the most popular reason. Okay, hopefully all that makes sense. So we've come to the final step in our protocol, which is aesthetics. So you guys are going to be most into this. This is a presentation design conference. So obviously, you know, aesthetics is not just making charts and slides look pretty and flashy and exciting and snazzy. And I've had all those requests made of me. And it's really missing the point of effective data visualization. Data viz aesthetics is all about cutting the clutter, the stuff that we don't need, and embracing simplicity and intentionality, making conscious choices about every single thing that we do, and including nothing that we don't need. When you look at slides like this, simplicity and intentionality do not apply here, okay? There's just too much going on. And do you really need all of it? Probably not. And you might be familiar with this term, cognitive load, which is defined as the total amount of mental effort being used in the working memory. So what this translates to in English is the higher the load on their brain of little like visual doodads and all extra stuff, visual stuff, the higher the load, the harder the work is for them to remember everything and to pay attention to you. And the last thing we want is for people to stop paying attention because your slide looks like this, right? You don't want that. So that's why I do one of my favorite crunchy granola things that I do every day. I'm a bit of a closet hippie. I love to detox every day. So I have come up with a very simple, straightforward approach to detoxing my charts once I have established which one I'm going to use and how I'm going to lay them out. So this is what it might look like before the detox, and this isn't even that bad. There's others that are much worse. But with just a few very simple changes, this is how it can look after just a few steps. So I can't walk step by step, but what I'll share with you is here. I removed a background, border, grid lines, axis lines, all unnecessary noise that people don't need. I increased the bar gap width size to 50% so it doesn't look so skinny. I'm directly labeling the data so that I don't need a legend, which is just extra noise. And I refined my font choice and size to make sure that it's readable, which is such a common problem in presentations. Now you'll notice that this slide looks a bit like a circus carnival. And that's because I want to really call out one specific intentional data viz tool that is very underutilized in the business world. And that is color. Color has a profound impact on the way that we interpret data and the way that we place emphasis and want to act on data. There's a lot of meaning in there. But when we take views like this, which is real, I did not make this up, There are so many colors everywhere that none of them mean anything. So when they don't mean anything, there's no way to call anything out. And this is not an intentional use of color. So I'm going to show you one of my absolute most favorite storytelling tricks I have in my book, and you may know this already. But rather than having a whole bunch of different colors, I'm going to reduce these colors to an emotionally neutral gray, making sure that each measure has a different color. Okay, now this might look a little sad or glum, but this creates a backdrop for how I'm going to tell my story. And I want to tell you that you don't want to let your data viz tool decide what matters to your decision makers by using the default color palette that it puts it in. That is a choice that you have to take control of. So here we have kind of our final slide laid out, and it looks a little grim. We don't know where to look. So we're going to use color to strategically emphasize our key message, okay? Not to look at all of it, but we're directing where their eye and attention should look. So notice I colored the bar here to make that stand out. And then I color the corresponding text in my storyline to create a connective tissue between my message and the visual data so it is crystal clear, right? So very quickly, I just want to put all of those steps together for you to understand exactly how to lay this out. So I might do some stage setting to say, okay, we're gathered here because we saw that our usability satisfaction score has been steadily declining, especially in Q2. Here's what that looks like. Now, when we dove into the data, the first thing we saw was pretty interesting. We saw that account information tasks resulted in no successful visits, but ... create suspense and a surprising twist. When we dug a little deeper and we added how many visits were attached to each reason, then the story changed. We saw that product specs is tied for our most popular and is the third least successful user tasks. You can go even further with our insight journey that I talked to before. We dug even deeper when we found that this is particularly problematic for our mobile users. 80% of our unsuccessful product spec visits were from a mobile phone. Now, what are some theories on why this might have happened? Well, we have two. First, the site redesign did not properly apply the responsive layout to our product pages. Don't know how this was missed, but that's what happened. And when we looked at our survey commentary, we saw a lot of responsive issues and reports of images breaking on those pages. See how I've dug deeper and I've provided all the information I think is enough to inform my recommendation. So we recommend marketing to meet with product managers to investigate these specific issues. We want to get that done in about 2 weeks. And we'd like to meet with development to create more rigorous mobile testing protocols. We don't want to let that slip through the cracks again. And if we don't act, we could see an additional 7% decrease in satisfaction with our mobile customers. And we like happy mobile customers, not like this guy. And you could even take this further and calculate out, what does that mean from a customer retention perspective? What does that mean from a sales perspective, from financial? How far can you take those stakes? But what this story, which I'm hoping you've been able to see, is that it incorporated all of those elements that we talked about in the very beginning in order to keep people engaged and motivate them towards action. And that's it. Let's very quickly recap the steps in the Pica protocol so you can remember it even better. P for purpose, make sure there is one and that it's tied to a specific need that people have. I for insight. What is the insights you're gaining from the chart you selected, and how can you really make those pop out? C for context. How can you go deeper and make sure that you are telling a full story? And A for aesthetics, where this doesn't have to be hard. It's not terribly complex, but very simple data design principles will really help your data come across accurately and intuitively. So I would love for you to start thinking about in the chat I want to know, what's the one thing you'll do differently starting tomorrow? What was one thing that really stood out to you where you had an aha moment? Maybe you knew it before, but you heard it a different way, or maybe it was completely new and you're like, yeah, that sounds great. I'm going to try that. And, what I want to do before we completely wrap is I have a tool for you that is a great way to understand where you are in your data storytelling and presentation journey. And you can learn what your biggest data presentation pitfall is at my assessment. Totally free, takes less than 30 seconds to complete. But you can find that at leapica.com/assessment, where I give you a full customized report and some strategies of how to overcome your current biggest pitfall. So I'm happy to take some questions now, and then I just have a couple slides that I'll wrap with at the end with our questions. And thanks for listening, guys. What do you got for me?
Hey, Lea. Okay, so people loved your presentation. So we have really cool comments here in the chat.
Great.
So people say that, some of them say that simplicity always wins. I really enjoyed it. Milena says that she liked the McKinsey title. Maybe that was something that she didn't know. Awesome presentation. The color trick, linking the story to the data by color. Using more pictures in my presentations. Well, that's also an important one. So Mona is saying that she's going to try to recommend the takeaway given in the headline. It may not work. I do use color, but I like the way you use it here. Color coordination. Okay, so a lot of comments are coming in. In the meantime, we're waiting for some questions in the Q&A because there was some more action in the chat. So if you guys have any questions, just drop them in the Q&A. Maybe one that can come from me if I'm allowed. I would love to hear what would be your recommendation if people want to improve their data visualization skills. What can they do? Like, what is the next step that they can take? Are there any resources or any maybe books that you can also recommend?
Sure. So obviously, as this is what I do for a living, there's a few steps. First, that assessment is going to cover the 4 biggest areas where we have our pitfalls. So it's such a free, easy step. You get so many free resources once you opt to get your results. I'm also in process of publishing my first book this year, and you can get on a special waiting list to find out all those details, because my book is literally going to cover the entire process that I have. So that link is leapica.com/thebook. Very easy to remember. But I also want to recognize the immense contribution that my contemporaries make in the space. So if I had to give you one book recommendation, it's the one I mentioned before called Good Charts by Scott Baronato. It is incredibly detailed and comprehensive. It really focuses on how you're telling that story in the slides, whereas my approach, including things like my online course, it covers the full gamut of the presentation process with stuff like presentation conceptualization and planning, slide design, and also public speaking skills, which is often kind of left not talked about in stuff. So I can definitely recommend checking that book out, but I really encourage people to check out some of the free resources I have to start.
That's fantastic. And what I also wanted to mention, because I didn't know, I thought it was a secret. I thought the book was a secret, so I wasn't sure whether I should mention it or not. But what I also wanted to say is that if people want, they can also listen to your podcast, the Present Beyond Measure show. There are some great episodes there, so I definitely recommend you guys go and check it out. Obviously, Lea is a bit busy with a different project now, so the podcast is a bit behind, but I'm pretty sure she will catch up very, very soon, and a lot of new cool episodes are going to be up. For those of you who have not yet heard of it or have not yet checked it, go ahead. There are really amazing episodes that you can listen to there. So that's another resource.
I've been blessed to have folks like Gar Reynolds and Nancy Duarte and really some of the top minds in the presentation and data viz field. So really, really excellent stuff, lots for free.
Absolutely. So we have, let's say, a time for one or two more questions. Do you have any tips for when you're presenting monthly data, how can you make that one better for your audience?
Yeah, so interestingly, the paradox of a regular readout is that you're looking for a story rather than the story kind of revealing itself, right? So what I try to recommend is that when you are trying to make monthly data, you're first setting the stage with the things that they expect to see, whatever your key performance indicators are, you're projecting that up front, but you're trying to look at the data each month with a different slice, or you're really relying on conversations with your stakeholders to find out what they care about that month. What's the biggest thing that's on their plate that month? What is the biggest obstacle, the thing that's keeping them up at night? So that's an ongoing dialogue. We kind of go back to our desks and sit with our data all day, but we're not actively mining our stakeholders for information that can point us to where we can look for a key story. And then, of course, in my pie in the sky dream is that if there is no story, you're not going through a whole presentation or meeting. Rather, you're just sending an update to inform people that things are where they're at. But I know that's a major cultural shift that a lot of places aren't ready for yet.
That's a great one. That definitely a great advice. One more question here. I think we touched a bit on that one. I don't know if it's from someone who was part of the masterclass yesterday with Nolan. We had a masterclass with Nolan on present your data. So he was talking about the pie chart. And what would be your what would be your response to people who always want to use the pie chart for everything?
Yeah, so my position on this, as well as many people in contemporaries of mine, is actually beginning to soften. Rather than just obliterating it from our memory and saying don't ever use it, now we're seeing a nuance of specific cases where it is okay to use the pie chart, but sparingly, not on every slide, and there's very specific guidelines. So you really don't want to use it if there's more than 2 to 3 major segments that you have, and one of them or two of them or whatever area you're focusing on using that color trick I showed you is so overwhelmingly larger or smaller, their brains are not trying to calculate the relative area to each other, which is why pies can be problematic. So when you're doing that, you're letting this area of color instantly communicate which one matters, and then you're relaying your observation, and you're always labeling pieces directly rather than these spider series lines that come out. You don't want any of that. So it's all about the right the right skills. I think of it like a scalpel. A scalpel is a tool or a weapon, depending on the level of skill and expertise that you have to use it, right? Pies are the same.
That's definitely a good response to that one, because obviously a lot of people are being asked to simply present everything with pie charts since it's the most common common tool. Okay, so again, back to you.
Okay, thank you. So great questions, guys. I'm so glad that some of this stuff really resonated. I hope I get to see you on my list and things. Plus, also reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm at Lea Pica. If you send me an invitation to connect and with a message, I will 100% accept. I love to hear from people that I've spoken to. So I just want to close with this little bit of wisdom from the late Aldous Huxley, which is facts do not cease to exist because they are ignored. And that might be true, but I think getting ignored sucks. And I don't want that for me. I definitely don't want that for you. And my hope is that by learning frameworks like this, your insights will not be ignored anymore, but rather celebrated and acted upon. So with that, I wish you well. And please, viz responsibly, my friends. Thank you so much, and namaste.
Thank you so much, Lea. This was such a great session. I think it's a great closing of day one. Definitely a lot of insights, and thank you for being with us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.